Oftentimes, the anniversary of a traumatic event like today can cause an increase in distress.
Joining us to share ways to cope with this anxiety is clinical psychologist Dr. Elaine Ducharme. Dr. Ducharme, it's always nice to have you here and, of course, to help people on a day like today. Now, how are we doing as people, as a nation, recovering from this tragedy?
You know, we're really actually doing pretty well. It was quite amazing after 9/11, when we looked a year later, about a very small percentage of people really were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which was amazing. And it's partly because everybody really grabbed together and came together and said, we are so unbelievably shocked that this could happen. We are going to survive as a team, and we're going to show people that we are strong.
And in the days and the weeks after, especially in New York, that response was amazing. What do you think made New York different, and how is it doing now?
Well, I think one of the things that made New York different was the nation. That was our first attack. Nobody had ever dared to attack the United States on our soil. So it was a shock, and people came together and were really resilient. This is really in sharp contrast to, say, Hurricane Katrina, where in New Orleans, a year later, about 30% of the population still had PTSD. And we didn't pull together. I mean, a lot of things happened that we don't have time to go into today, but that didn't allow people to be as resilient and to bounce back. And I think it's that connection with people that brought people together and allowed people to recover better.
Absolutely, that connection is powerful. You mentioned resilience. What do you mean by resilience?
Resilience is actually something simple. It's just bouncing back from something bad that's happened. And many people are born with it and seem to be more resilient. They just bounce back naturally. But you really can be taught it. There are millions, not millions, there are about 10 different things that we do that we give people instructions on how to do it. And then there are a lot of different ways that people can go about doing it. But one of the first is to have connections and to have people, to have a support system and be able to not be alone during these times, because that's really one of the things that allows us to recover from pretty much anything.
Now, it's been 13 years, and a lot of people out there, they might be thinking, well, you know, I've moved past it. I'm done grieving. Are there people out there who's still grieving, and what messages might you say to those people?
I think, Seth, that there are a number of people who are grieving at different levels. Most people in general, on a day like today, may feel a little bit more somber. They may feel a little bit scared. They remember. There are some people, on the other hand, who are really struggling. And for those people, if they're still struggling on a regular basis, not just today, but daily, or crying, or having a hard time doing things, at that point what we're looking at is a more complicated grief, and these people really need to get more professional help to deal with it. Interestingly, I saw a lot of people not really processing the 9/11 grief until about 10 years later. They sort of pulled it together and tried to get through it and said it didn't bother me. And once things settled down, then they began to really look at the impact of this trauma on themselves.
Well, I think, Dr. Ducharme, I was just a kid. I was in high school. Now as an adult, I have children. Now I understand, and it does impact me differently. When I look at it, I'm like, wow, how dare that happen to our country? So now that I'm a woman, I have a different perspective. So it does affect people differently, especially as they grow. And I'm sure it definitely affects people differently that were actually directly affected by tragedies in general.
And you know, I think today is going to be a harder day for people that were either they lost people directly in 9/11, the first responders, people that were right there and watched it and remember things like smells. One of the interesting things is things like smell go right to the very base of our brain. It's it's really not a sophisticated neurologic function. And it's something that we remember very, very strongly. So if people were to smell something similar, it can really bring you right back to that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the first responders, people that had direct impact. The other piece is that today will be difficult for families that were involved in other tragedies. For example, Sandy Hook. So other things, school shootings, those kinds of things, and people that may have lost other family members directly, families that have lost a child to suicide or illness. This can be a really hard day because it just brings back those feelings of grief.
We're out of time, but the reason you're here is to help us through this. What can people do?
They can try and do something to make themselves feel better. They can make a donation to the Red Cross. They can do something out of their comfort zone. They can sign up to do the Tunnel to Tower race. Anything that allows you to get together with friends if you're feeling lonely, talk about it, process it, and just recognize your feelings so that you can move on.
You're right. It's absolutely important that we talk. If
Absolutely.
nothing else, we talk about it. Thank you so much for joining us today.